We are witnessing the unfolding of a full-scale financial and economic crisis within Russia, a systemic catastrophe that is the direct, inevitable consequence of an unsustainable war. The idea that Russia is a stable petrostate capable of fighting indefinitely is a dangerous illusion. The evidence, drawn directly from the statements of Russian economists and official financial data, points to a state that is rapidly running out of cash and is now resorting to desperate, self-destructive measures to survive. This is FPV Explainer, where we break down the most fascinating stories in drone warfare. If you are enjoying this deep dive, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us what topic you want to see next. Your feedback shapes our future videos and keeps us bringing you clear, detailed analysis from the front lines. The first and most alarming sign is the structural failure of the Russian budget. The nation is operating with a record-breaking federal deficit that the leadership is incapable of resolving. Despite desperate attempts to close the gap through increased borrowing, the system is fundamentally broken. This financial hole is not just a bookkeeping error, it is the physical manifestation of a military spending regime that consumes everything and produces nothing for the civilian economy. The cost of running the military machine is now exceeding all available revenue streams, leaving the government in a state of continuous financial panic. This desperation has led to the only available yet deeply damaging political solution: an aggressive tax on the population. The government is preparing for massive tax hikes on businesses and an increase in consumption taxes like the value-added tax, or VAT, to generate the billions needed to finance the military effort. This maneuver proves that the leadership has lost control of the economy. They are forced to admit that they cannot simply print money, a move that would trigger uncontrollable hyperinflation, so they are choosing the secondary path of financial destruction, actively strangling the civilian sector through higher taxes. This is a cruel paradox. The state is paying for the war by making its own citizens poorer, a direct, visible transfer of wealth from the populace to the military budget. This move has been described by Russian economists themselves as criminal for business. Why? Because the tax increases are not absorbed by large corporations alone. They cascade down the supply chain, inflating the final consumer cost by far more than the official tax percentage. The burden of funding the deficit is being placed squarely on the shoulders of the average citizen and the small to medium-sized businesses that are already suffering from a collapse in demand. The final element of this financial catastrophe is the return of high, uncontrollable inflation. The official data confirms that inflation has surged back to alarmingly high rates, driven by the massive injection of money into the system and the crippling shortages in key sectors. The cost of staples and fuel is climbing rapidly, further cementing the financial dead end. This ensures that the efforts of the central bank to stabilize the currency are being undermined by the catastrophic spending and financial desperation of the Kremlin. The money is running out, and the only solution the state has is to accelerate the impoverishment of its own people.
We have identified the core financial instability, the crisis of inflation, and the budget deficit. But the most politically damaging and strategically significant symptom of this economic rot is the catastrophic fuel collapse. This is not a simple supply chain disruption. It is the deliberate, self-inflicted agony of a market that has been crippled by the war and is now collapsing under a combined assault of military strikes and government mismanagement. The evidence of this collapse is now unavoidable for every citizen in Russia. The price of gasoline on the retail market has climbed relentlessly, surpassing 10% growth since the beginning of the year, a rate that dwarfs the already high official inflation figures. But the price is only the secondary problem. The primary issue is physical scarcity. This scarcity is the direct, calculated result of Ukraine's kinetic sanctions campaign. Precision drone strikes have systematically targeted the most vital assets of the Russian oil industry, crippling key refineries and distribution hubs. This has resulted in the loss of between 8 and 14% of total processing capacity, a monumental and unsustainable blow to the nation's energy independence. The market is now suffering from a catastrophic physical deficit that is manifesting in a chaotic breakdown of the distribution system. This is where the government's attempt to manage the crisis has only amplified the disaster. The market has fractured, with a clear distinction emerging between large state-aligned oil majors and the independent networks. The independent gas stations, which often serve remote areas and account for a significant portion of the retail market, are being systematically starved of supply. These operators are being forced to close their pumps because they simply cannot secure fuel. The reason is twofold: uncontrolled price growth and supply obstruction. The central bank's failure to contain inflation means wholesale prices are skyrocketing. Independent operators cannot purchase fuel at those high wholesale prices and still sell at a competitive retail rate, leading to massive losses and forced closure. More damningly, the industry is engaging in systemic market abuse. While the largest state-aligned oil companies are obligated to sell a portion of their fuel on the stock exchange to the independent sector, they are effectively sabotaging the deliveries. They prioritize funneling their limited supply to their own branded stations, leaving independent operators without product. This is a deliberate, cynical move that is driving thousands of small businesses into bankruptcy and concentrating power in the hands of the state-aligned energy giants. The consequence is a vicious spiral of decline. Strikes reduce physical supply. Scarcity drives up wholesale prices. Large majors hoard the supply for their own branded stations. Independent operators fail due to financial losses and lack of product. Chaos spreads as vast geographical areas lose access to fuel. Despite government claims of stability, the most profound danger is that this crisis is not remaining local. The fuel shortage is a visible, daily humiliation for the state, confirming that the war is coming home. Furthermore, the lack of supply is a direct threat to the military's small-scale logistics, which rely heavily on commercial-grade gasoline for drone generators and forward-area transport. This economic agony is the inescapable, brutal evidence that the financial resources of the Russian state are finite and that the strategic decision to wage war is resulting in a fundamental, systemic failure of its most vital industrial sector. The agony of the market is the clearest sign that this trajectory is unsustainable.
We have analyzed the self-inflicted damage of inflation and the collapse of the domestic fuel market. But the most terrifying and unpredictable threat facing the Kremlin's financial system is a ticking time bomb built into its own banking sector: the catastrophic risk of a massive trillion-ruble outflow of deposits. This isn't external pressure. It is a profound internal weakness that, if triggered, threatens to accelerate the economic crisis into a full-scale systemic collapse. This profound crisis is a direct, perverse consequence of the central bank's desperate struggle to finance the war without admitting to full money printing. In an attempt to manage the immense deficit and reduce their own borrowing costs, Russian commercial banks have aggressively cut interest rates on savings deposits. The average rate on long-term deposits has plummeted to alarmingly low levels, reaching a new historical floor not seen since before the war-induced chaos. This move, designed to shore up bank balance sheets, has created a fatal disincentive for the average Russian citizen to keep their savings within the state financial system. This brings us to the banking bomb. When citizens see their savings earning less than the surging official rate of inflation, and far less than the devastating price increases they experience daily on necessities like food and fuel, they rationally conclude that their money is safer outside the banking system. This situation is compounded by the visible signs of a failing economy: the long queues for gasoline, the mass factory shutdowns, and the general anxiety about the future. When public confidence erodes, the first reaction is a flight of capital. Analysts are warning of a potential mass exodus of deposits, a catastrophic withdrawal of up to 10 trillion rubles in cash from the banking system. The financial domino effect of such an exodus would be instantaneous and catastrophic, initiating a devastating chain reaction that the central bank is powerless to stop. The inflationary surge. The withdrawal of trillions of rubles from deposits and its subsequent injection back into the consumer economy as citizens buy goods or assets to hedge against inflation would create an uncontrollable, massive surge in demand. This sudden influx of cash would trigger a new, highly destructive wave of demand-side inflation, instantly negating the central bank's previous stabilization efforts and sending the ruble into a steep and potentially irreversible decline. Banking instability and toxic assets. While the major state-owned banks are currently reporting high profits, these numbers mask mounting hidden liabilities. Reports indicate a dangerous increase in credit risk concentration among the top banks, meaning their stability is tied to the health of just a few massive, likely struggling corporate borrowers. The sudden mass withdrawal of deposits, coupled with soaring non-performing loans from the collapsing civilian sector, would immediately expose the structural weakness of the financial system. This would inevitably lead to a frantic scramble for liquidity and necessitate massive inflationary government bailouts, further exacerbating the budget deficit. The Kremlin is trapped in an agonizing political and economic contradiction. To avoid this systemic collapse, the central bank needs to raise rates dramatically, but doing so would instantly choke the military's ability to service its debt and halt what is left of the civilian economy. This trillion-ruble deposit crisis is a unique, self-inflicted vulnerability that proves the fundamental unsustainability of the war economy. The attempt to manage both the war and financial stability is now guaranteed to fail, because the actions needed to solve one crisis, low rates to fund war debt, actively worsen the other, mass deposit outflow leading to hyperinflation. The system is now a volatile, self-destructive machine awaiting its inevitable breakdown.
We have analyzed the self-inflicted wounds of inflation and the banking system, but the structural crisis is deepening. We now confront the stark, non-negotiable reality of financial depletion, where the state is actively cannibalizing its own resources, leading to a profound collapse in critical civilian sectors. The cutting of resources is no longer a strategic option. It is a forced measure that exposes the total failure of economic governance and guarantees further social distress. The financial pressure of the war has forced the government into a tragic paradox. It cannot sustain its military ambitions without actively destroying its civilian economy. This financial cannibalism is devastating the agricultural sector, the very industry that provides basic food security. The state has been forced to make deep, dangerous cuts to its own support programs, including a significant reduction in the state program for agricultural support. This is not a sustainable cut. It is a direct attack on a sector that is already struggling with market collapse and high interest rates. This financial hardship is compounded by immediate, unavoidable agricultural failures. The collapse of the animal husbandry sector, where cattle and swine populations are declining, and a catastrophic decline in key harvests, such as the massive drop in the sunflower harvest, which guarantees a surge in domestic food prices. The government's priority is war, and the price is food stability, ensuring that the food crisis will deepen in the coming year. The resource drain is now spreading like a contagion throughout heavy and specialized industries. The initial shock of sanctions and the exit of Western companies has transitioned into a full-scale industrial crisis. The Avdovaz plant, once a symbol of domestic manufacturing, is reducing production and moving to a 4-day work week. This is a clear indicator that the war economy cannot compensate for the collapse of civilian demand and the lack of vital imported components. Simultaneously, the agricultural machinery industry is anticipating a sharp decline in production, as high interest rates and falling demand make it impossible for farmers to invest in new equipment. Even sectors like manufacturing,
which were supposed to be the engine of import substitution, are reporting widespread drops in profitability and anticipated mass layoffs. This industrial collapse is directly linked to the financial desperation of the Kremlin. The civilian economy is collapsing, and the government's response is to double down on the policies that caused the crisis. The state is accelerating its efforts to extract money from the population through higher taxes, while remaining unable to resolve its budget hole. The ultimate irony is that by prioritizing its war machine, the Russian government is guaranteeing the destruction of the very economic base that could, in theory, sustain it. The economic collapse is not just a statistical problem. It is a direct threat to the Russian state's ability to wage war, and the financial dead end they have reached is the clearest possible sign that the current trajectory is unsustainable.
We have spent this time meticulously charting the confluence of financial shock, industrial decay, and bureaucratic incompetence that defines the Russian state in late 2025. Now we deliver the final unavoidable conclusion. These economic crises are not merely static problems. They are terminal forces that are actively accelerating Russia's military defeat. The war is now structurally unwinnable because the Kremlin has lost the essential financial and industrial capacity to sustain its aggression. The evidence points to a massive, systemic failure that has been compounded by political paralysis. The central government is trapped in an agonizing paradox. It cannot lower the key interest rate because it risks triggering hyperinflation. It cannot raise the rate because it accelerates the collapse of industries that are vital for its war effort. This is a deliberate self-cannibalizing strategy. The choice to fund the military deficit by raising taxes is actively destroying the civilian economy, leading to a profound collapse in critical sectors like auto manufacturing and agricultural machinery. This industrial decay is not a side effect. It is a direct subtraction from the nation's capacity for war. A military cannot function when the domestic industrial base is forced to a 4-day workweek. This internal disintegration is now being met with an external economic and military fist. The financial desperation of the Kremlin is being ruthlessly exploited. The kinetic sanctions campaign, the sustained, successful strikes against oil refineries, has created a fuel collapse that is strangling the light logistics of the Russian army and forcing a political crisis in every region. This external pressure eliminates any possibility of a planned, stable war effort. The state is now forced to choose between defending its vital energy hubs and sustaining its troops on the front lines, a choice that is both strategically impossible and economically ruinous. The most terrifying prospect is the banking time bomb. The aggressive lowering of interest rates has created the distinct possibility of a trillion-ruble deposit outflow. This is a financial event that would instantly trigger a new, uncontrollable wave of inflation, sending the entire financial system into chaos and accelerating the political crisis. The Russian state is being consumed by the very contradictions it created. The actions required to maintain the facade of a strong ruble are the same actions that are guaranteeing a massive social and financial panic. The final verdict is that the Russian system has reached an economic dead end. The war has moved past the point of being a simple military loss. It has become an issue of structural insolvency. The combination of financial bankruptcy, the collapse of key domestic industries, and the moral rot in the military, where soldiers are fighting with equipment funded by charity, all converge to guarantee that the conflict is unsustainable. The war will end because Russia can no longer afford to pay the bills, and the inevitable systemic collapse is the ultimate mechanism that will deliver victory to Ukraine.